My name is Brandy Agerbeck, and this is a graphic facilitation show and tell. I invite you to visit loosetooth.com to find out more about my graphic facilitation work. Today I've got a slightly longer, more complicated story, but I'm very excited because it demonstrates a couple very powerful things. One thing is, often when people have done really good work and done research and they are ready to share their findings, they do that by having a meeting where they present, and they present in one direction. They share the information. This is a story about how to use facilitation and graphic facilitation to present that information, but also to invite two-way communication. So generating and answering questions, coming up with new ideas, and giving feedback back to that presenter about their research. A side note, also, the story talks a little bit about how to use color, and in this case, being consistent with color and connecting to content to reinforce learnings. So, this particular story is about a client. The client was a group within a very large company, and they wanted to have research done about a specific market segment. So they knew that there was a certain group of customers they wanted to know more about. So they hired a researcher, an outside researcher, and they paid that researcher lots of good money to do this study for them. That researcher, super fantastic, super smart, awesome folks, they spent lots of time and money and their techniques and their experience, and they came up with this great research study. So this research study was all about that market segment and came up with all these key findings that were organized in different groupings. So they come back to the client and say, here's what we found. Now, that client, because that client works in a super gigantic company, has to share that information with a series of business units. So it's got all these companies within their company that they need to share this information with. So they could have had a series of meetings where the researcher presented to each of these business units and shared the information one direction. So let's imagine that each of these business units are made of people You get the idea? Often what will happen is the researcher presents the findings and the information goes in one direction. What was great about this project is they were set up to get information back from each of those business units. So, in this case, what they did was each business unit had their own one-day meeting. At every one of those one-day meetings, they got the overview of the whole presentation, plus findings that were specific to their business unit. Now, they set themselves up to get a lot of value out of this research because not only did they have the client in the room and the researcher in the room talking about their specific findings, but they also had a facilitator and a graphic facilitator, in this case me. Now, why is it important to have a facilitator and graphic facilitator? It's important to have a facilitator in the room, or it's often very, very valuable to have a facilitator in the room because the facilitator is responsible for process. They're there to hold the space, to ask the questions, to create the agenda, and make sure that people are being heard and that that things are running smoothly. And the researcher is all about content. They are there to present that specific information. Now, it is extremely rare that you can find somebody who's really fantastic at balancing both process and content. But often, you really want that person, the researcher, to be the rock star with the content. Let them focus on the content so they don't have to worry about both disseminating the information and answering the questions and paying attention to things like, has that person had their hand up for a long time? When's the lunch going to show up? All those kind of process logistical situations that the facilitator can focus on. And lastly, if you have a graphic facilitator in the room, they are there to document. So they are the ones that makes sure that excuse me, all that good discussion that happens in this meeting, all the questions, ideas, and feedback that are generated from that presentation, they make sure that that's on paper and that's a record of the meeting. So in this case, each of these business units, they had their own meeting, like I said, and at each of these meetings, I created a series of charts. So just for an example, let's say that there was one chart per meeting, although there was more than that. I made sure that as the researcher was presenting the findings that were specific to that business unit, that all of those ideas were getting captured. So in this case, maybe business unit A was really focused on this green finding and these two yellow findings. Well, as that group came up with questions and came up with ideas, I was marking, making sure that I captured all those ideas and questions and all that feedback on their own chart. Now, very, very simple principle about how to use color for consistency. I made sure that as they were working, each chart that we created was consistent in color and consistent in order to that overview research study. So if you were looking at this research study and then you looked at my drawings, you had an absolute straight line connection between what this green topic was and what this green topic was here. So again, I know that sounds incredibly simple, but it's one of those simple, powerful ideas that make a big difference. So maybe this group looked at this red finding and this blue finding and had a whole series of ideas based on that. And just lastly, let's say this group had this green finding, this yellow finding, and this blue finding, and they created their ideas from that. Now, one thing that's very simple that you can see across these charts is, for example, in this group, there were a whole lot of ideas around the yellow and very few ideas around the blue. That doesn't necessarily mean the blue is a terrible idea, but very quickly, if you're comparing each of these charts from each of these meetings to each other, you can see where they more immediately came up with ideas, places that might be a first place to start. So it was very easy to compare across charts. So again, I'm just really excited about this project because it took something that the client had invested in. They decided they were going to hire these researchers to do this study and really made that study come to life and get kick-started and get ideation, get people to ideate around it instantly by having these thoughtful meetings with each of these business units. That was very well run by the client and by the researcher, who was fantastic in answering questions, also was great at helping facilitate, but also by having the facilitator there who was dedicated strictly to the process and making sure that everything was going smoothly and all questions were answered and everyone was heard, and also by having a graphic facilitator in the room who was dedicated to document. And again, that graphic facilitator used a very simple process of connecting color, of connecting her work, my work, to the key content through the use of consistent color and consistent layout. So that those charts with all these folks created a better shared understanding and shared meaning and ability to act on that great research study that client paid really good money for. So again, that's my latest show and tell. My name is Brandy Agerbeck, and you can find more of my work as a graphic facilitator at loosetooth.com.